Hello and welcome to the podcast. I'm Karen Weaver. My guest today is Dr. Zachary Faison, who is entering his ninth year as president of Edward Waters University, the 160-year-old HBCU in Jacksonville, Florida, and is the nation's first HBCU. Dr. Faison is the architect of what he calls the dream economy, a financially coherent, mission-aligned athletics model built specifically for HBCUs and small private colleges, in contrast to the Power Four framework that is quietly bankrupting institutions. Yes, it is, never designed to sustain it. Under his leadership, Edward Waters is offering this model for higher ed leaders to consider. He says it can work in multiple ways, from football winning over a nationally ranked opponent to women's basketball winning their conference title to back-to-back adjacent baseball championships, and also for the institution, a top 25 national ranking in social mobility. Welcome to the podcast, Zachary.
Thank you so very much, Dr. Weaver. It is an honor indeed to be joining you today. Looking forward to our dialogue.
9 years. That's a pretty strong length for a presidency these days, don't you?
It is a lot of grace and a great board and a
Yeah,
great board chair and just a great community. So I am truly blessed. It was yesterday was my first day of me starting my ninth year here at Edward Water. So I'm tremendously blessed.
that's great. Well, when you were first there, I did go look at your 216-page report from 2016 to 2023. I'll be
Yeah,
honest, I didn't read every word, but I did see it. And there were a couple of questions that I had to just kind of give us a sense of where the institution was in your
sure.
first 5 or 6 years. First, what was the genesis of the report? You wanted to sort of track, but you also wanted to lay out where you wanted things to be shown with evidence, not just narrative.
Right, right. Well, that was the idea. We had at that time, we're about 4.5 or 5 years into, our leadership here at the university. And we really had, really been fortunate to have really, along with our academic community, really forced some really transformative kinds of things here at the university. And so we thought that it was really important to chronicle that, right? If you don't tell your story, no one else is. And so it was really a part of us really trying to do all that we could to share with our Jacksonville community, our Northeast Florida community, certainly throughout the state and throughout the country, relative to the tremendous transformation that we had undergone here at the institution. We had gone from about 800 some odd students to, today we're going to cross 1,300 students today. And for a small private institution, that's pretty remarkable. We had been Edward Waters College for over 150 years and then transitioned to university and brought on a graduate degree program. So a number of other things, but of course, most central to this conversation, we made the decision to move from an NAIA institution, which, as you know, is the home for a number of small institutions like Edward Waters, and take that leap of faith to move to NCAA in Division II. And that was certainly a very strategic component of our overall strategic plan in moving our university forward. So just a lot of things that kind of coalesced as we look to transform our institution.
There were four pillars, if you will, inside that report that you really emphasize: student success,
Yes.
financial viability, academic expansion, what you just talked about, and
Right.
philanthropic culture. How's that going in year 9?
Well, it is going phenomenal. I always say we aren't everywhere that we want to be, but thank God we're not where we used to be. So when I arrived, we had run 10 consecutive years of operating deficits. And that's not unique to Edward Waters. If you look across the landscape of a lot of small private institutions, they're running deficits each year and just barely surviving and barely getting by. We had not had a new academic degree program, 4-year degree program in almost 30 plus years. And so we really needed to reimagine and recast what we felt Edward Waters could be and what we felt it should be going forward. Again, a very prodigious history. Again, we're the first private independent institution of higher learning in our entire state and the first historically Black college, but we really needed a renaissance, if you will, an infusion of new ideas, new energy, and charting a new pathway forward. And so, that was, as you mentioned, we came up with our strategic plan called Eminence 2025. We're actually going to be unveiling our new strategic plan, our new 10-year strategic plan next week, as a matter of fact, when we welcome our faculty and staff back from the summer break. But that Eminence 2025 plan, as you mentioned, had those four pillars. Financial viability was one of them. As I mentioned, we were running deficits, and we're really seeing some dire financial straits from that perspective. Student success, I believe very strongly. A lot of my mentors have said to me, you can point to all these other touchstones, in higher ed, leadership or what have you. But at the end of the day, it's about student success.
Yeah.
It's making sure that our students are graduating, and beyond that now, that they're, being able to be gainfully employed in the world of work, and or being able to successfully go on to graduate or professional school. So student success was important. And then, as you talked about, that philanthropic culture that we wanted to build here at the institution, of course, and then along with inaugurating a really 21st century academic enterprise here at the institution, as we look to refashion and recast what our academic profile was here at the university. So those are kind of our four overarching pillars, and we've been demonstrably successful at really trying to move the ball forward towards that end.
Do you find like you have everybody rowing in the same direction in terms of those four pillars?
Yeah. I'll be very honest. Initially, there was a lot of skepticism.
Yeah.
I came in as a 37, 38-year-old president. They're like, who is this young guy? He's coming in. He's got all these wild ideas. I'll give you this quick story. I had a long time a donor to our institution who was the former CEO of CSX Railroad Corporation, which is headquartered right here in Jacksonville. So he'd been a long time donor for our institution. I went and sat with him. And I said, hey, I'm going to take this institution from college to university. We're going to NCAA Division II. We're going to do all these things. And as a grizzled, veteran of a CEO of Fortune 500 company, he was like, I don't really know if this young man really understands what he got himself into, right?
Right.
So he didn't tell me that then, but we fast forward about 4 or 5 years later, and we had transformed and were well on our way to realizing a lot of these things. He's now on my board, right?
Well, that's incredible. That's great.
Absolutely incredible, and talks about how, you know, you know, this transformation that we've undergone, as you mentioned earlier, it was really about getting everyone to buy in,
Yeah.
right?
And that's
Everyone,
hard. That is
I mean,
hard to do. Yeah.
students, faculty, staff, alumni, the community, because people often are fearful of change, right? No one likes change except for a wet baby, is what I say. You know what I mean? Even they can be, pretty upset when they're changed, right? And so it's all this change, but what I think we were successful in doing was helping to, you know, everyone to see how these changes would benefit them. If you
Yeah.
can make it where folks around the institution, all the stakeholders can see, well, this change though can help you. It can benefit you if you're a student, if you're a member of our faculty, a staff person, an alum, a community member. How are some of the things that we're talking about doing? How are they going to impact, the role that you play here at the university and help to propel the things that are important to you forward? And so again, we've been really successful in doing just that. Again, highest enrollment we've had in over 25 years. Our endowment has almost tripled. And we were successful in moving to NCAA Division II, which was very, very, very important. A lot of folks said, well, you're investing in athletics, like athletics loses money every year. And they were right. It typically does, but I had a different take on it, a different model that I know we're going to talk more about.
Yeah, absolutely. So that does lead me into the transition NAI to D2, which I have deliberately tried to reach out to institutions who have done that transition because I think it's so profoundly different, and you really have to have a lot of your eggs lined up before you even start. So when I read your report, your two strategic priorities were create financial viability through the development and implementation of sustainable and progressive institutional business model, which I assume will feed into athletics, and
Yes.
then also engender a culture of institutional philanthropic support and establish the Edward Waters brand as a best-in-class institution of distinction and emerging eminence. Okay, tie those two things for the NAIA move to D2.
Absolutely. And they all check each of those boxes.
Okay.
So firstly, as we talk about really our brand, right? So Edward Waters, as you know, sits in the heart of Jacksonville. We're in the deep South. This is football country. Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm a graduate of University of Georgia and Vanderbilt. This is football country, right? And then within the HBCU space, I used to say this all the time. I'm an HBCU graduate. And, we have, phenomenal institutions throughout the HBCU space that are high academic. I mean, their reputations, I mean, are just, inimitable in terms of what they produce. But oftentimes, the first thing that you hear about, institution A is the phenomenal football program. Right? It's Grambling State
Yeah.
University and Eddie Robinson. You immediately go to Grambling football, or even outside of the HBCU space. Georgia, where I went to school, is a phenomenal place, but everyone knows Georgia won two national championships in the last 4 or 5 years, right? I think about Howard Schnellenberger down in Miami,
Yep.
and how the enrollment applications grew when started to really, really invest in their football program. So we said we already had a football program that's operating at the NAIA level, but we set a footprint with the Southern Intercollegiate Athletic Conference that has some notable HBCUs like Tuskegee University, if anyone wants to say the Tuskegee Airmen,
Yep.
Savannah State University, Fort Valley State University, Clark Atlanta University. There were all these universities that were within about a 5-hour radius of our institution that really had a lot of brand recognition. And to be very transparent, brand recognition that we desired, but that at Edward Waters, we really did not have nationally.
Okay.
And so we said, hey, we had a football program, but it was an independent program. We weren't really members of any kind of conference. The conference that we were in, which was the GCAC conference, which is another HBCU conference of NAIA institutions, we were the only institution that had football. So
Oh,
we didn't even have an opportunity to play, other HBCUs or institutions that would really fire up our fan base. And so we said, listen, the SIAC is right here in our footprint. It gives us that brand recognition. It would excite our alumni base. It would excite our community in ways that perhaps it never has been. And so let's take that leap. The other piece that you talked about was around academic and student success. So what we found when we did the research, and this was existed while we were in AIA, my student athletes performed better academically as a whole than my general population of students. And we see that often because of the discipline, because of the regimented way in which they have to kind of approach college life often, at least at this level, we see a large proportion of students that really perform better academically. And the move to NCAA, as you know, the eligibility requirements are even heightened more
yeah.
so than at the NAIA level. So from a student success perspective, we were able to check that box to say, hey, this is the right move for us from that perspective.
Mm.
And then lastly, the financial viability. And so, I knew that we were going to employ a very different model, which is the model that I talk about in the op-ed that I wrote around the dream economy.
Yeah.
You wouldn't know it to look at me now, but when I was in high school, I played high school basketball, tennis. I fashioned myself an athlete. And if you had talked to me at 17 or 18 and you asked me what my dream was, it was not to be a college president. I wanted to go to the NBA, right? You couldn't tell me that at 17 or 18, I wasn't going to the NBA to be, the next great point guard, right? And I knew that, and I knew I had, a bevy of friends that, we all felt that way at 17 or 18. And I said, that may be something for us to tap into. Why? Because there are so many folks, so many young people that if I had been given the opportunity to say, hey, we'll give you a chance to come and pursue your dream at an NCAA Division II institution, scholarship notwithstanding, but we'll give you a shot to come and be a part of the program, whether that's as a walk-on or what have you. I would have taken that shot because at that time, that was my life. I really, that's what
Yeah.
I wanted.
Get
And
it.
so, that aspiration was something that I felt that we could tap into in a way that would attract students and help us to kind of turn the typical financial, I say, gulf that often exists in terms of the revenue and resources that small HBCUs and just small private institutions in general are investing in athletics, and they're seeing tremendous losses. And so that was part of what our plan and our strategy was. And we've been able to do that at a very, very high and demonstrably successful level.
For those who don't understand geographically, I mean, Florida is such a large state. It's such a huge landmass, and it seems to have a certain density about colleges, particularly in Division I.
It does.
How do you differentiate yourself as a Division II? And specifically, how many Division II schools are there in Florida?
That's a great question. That's a
Yeah.
great question. And that was part of our thinking as well. So, our transition to NCAA Division two makes us uniquely, we're the only NCAA Division two historically Black college or university in the entire state of Florida, right?
Okay.
Florida is what, the maybe third or fourth most populous state in the country behind
Yeah.
California, Texas, New York. So for us to be able to own that market, to say, hey, if you're interested in attending a historically Black college or university and you want to play NCAA Division two sports, Edward Waters University now owns that space and the
Gotcha.
fourth most populous state in the country. Again, marketing, branding, that gave us a niche. That gave us a really a leg up on the competition, right? And so there are about, I'm not sure how many total Division two institutions there are, because like you said, we are very densely populated with NCAA Division one institutions. But again, for us, that could be, that's a calling card for us.
Ye
As we go and are recruiting student athletes. The other thing is that we were able to observe when we were in a IA institution how many times my coaches were getting beaten out for athletes that they were recruiting when parents and students were leaving Florida to go to other NCAA Division two HBCUs because there was none that existed in
Oh,
the entire state of Florida, right? And so, we had that evidence as well to say, hey, if we were to become NCAA Division two, we know there are so many parents that had said to us, hey, if you are Division two, my kid would be going to Edward Waters,
right.
right? Because they can stay at home. I can get to the games. I don't have to travel out of state. So, it was kind of the calculus of all of those different factors that
Okay.
said to us, this is the right move for us. It really is.
So finances are always a big decision. You said you were able to scale back your travel, which is a huge piece of all of this. Missed class time is so important to consider.
Yes. Yes.
Did you have to add or drop any programs in order to align yourself with the new conference?
We did not. As a matter of fact, we didn't drop any programs. We've added some programs, but they weren't necessarily programs that we had to add to become members of the SIAC.
Okay.
Again, when we looked at the SIAC conference that we joined, most of all the sports that they carry, we already carried at the NAIA level. So there was an investment that we had to make from a compliance perspective. There was some investment that we had to make from athletic training. We had to make some investments in terms of our academic administration and then also academic support for student athletes. Those were some investments that we had to make. The infrastructure was really around aligning financial aid, our faculty athletic representatives, and the entire institution around this move. It was very, very important at the NCAA when they came and talked to us that this was not just an athletics move, but it truly was an institutional move, and that there was buy-in from all the stakeholders and constituencies here at the institution. And again, initially it was a tough sell, but when we were able to translate how this move would impact potentially, greater outcomes from an academic perspective, we got our faculty on board, right?
Yeah.
We're able to demonstrate, hey, that we can do this and actually be a revenue generator for us, that could free up resources for salary increases and raises and those kinds of things that faculty and staff love to hear.
Oh,
At
yeah.
first, they were a little skeptical. They're like, I've never heard athletics being able to do that. But when we were able to lay out the model of what we were planning to do, again, we were able to get pretty much universal buy-in.
All right. So let's walk right into that model, the dream economy. Walk us through that.
Yep. So I'll use football as an example. I think that's one that people often ask about. And so, for example, at most institutions, they'll have, well, let's say Division two. Let's take Division two. Division two only allows up to 36 scholarships, right? So if you do that math at Division two level, for us it's about $25,000 a year, all in. That's our tuition fees on campus, everything. It's about
Okay.
$25,000 for us here. And so if you take that, multiply that times 36 scholarships, right? You get an investment there of right at about, well, we do about 28 equivalencies. So that's about $450,000 or so, approximately, in scholarship dollars that we offer at the university, right? And so that's for 28 equivalencies. So we do about 28 full scholarships
Okay.
right now, right? So those 28 full scholarships, those in terms of dollars, our head football coach has those dollars that he can spread throughout his program, right? And so what you do is you're building a scholarship. So that student athlete might get some academic aid. They may get Pell Grant dollars. They may get, if they're Florida resident, we have our Florida Ease Grant that goes to students that are native Floridians. And so then the scholarship becomes last dollar, right? After all of, and so he's able to spread that $450,000 or so across the entire roster. Now, my football coach, though, has what I call a enrollment goal. His enrollment goal is 125 student athletes, right? And so many of them are actually paying. They're not receiving one dime in scholarship money, right? Because many of them, as I talked about earlier, they have the dream like I did when I was 17 or 18. So you're going to give me an opportunity to come and walk on and play NCAA Division II level football, count me in, right? And so those are students that are actually paying. So again, if you take that roster of about 125 students, if I'm only putting in about $450,000 or so, and we're generating in net tuition revenue almost about $1.5 million. You do the math, that's to the good of about almost $900,000. Now you do have to, account for, your personnel cost and all of
Yeah.
that. But
Yeah.
if you look at it in terms
Yeah.
of just kind of the raw number, that's how we play it out. We typically have an institutional margin of about $500,000, right? Some of that we do have to reinvest in the program. But again, if you look at it from a revenue generating perspective, particularly for small privates, and you approach it from that perspective, then athletics can be, and we're demonstrable proof of that, a revenue generating auxiliary at your institution. And I just use football as an example. I was on the phone with my women's basketball coach just yesterday. He's going to have 50 student athletes. But NCAA Division II only allows 10 scholarships. So he spreads those out. But many of those young women are paying students. Now, the inevitable question is, well, how are you keeping them? How do you do that?
Mhm.
So we have what we call our varsity program,
I saw
and
those.
then we have our developmental program.
Saw
They're coming in as a part of our developmental program, play intra squad scrimmages. We have a junior college that's here, Florida State College at Jacksonville that's here. They get to play with them, and each year our coach moves two or three up to the varsity program,
Okay.
right? And he's actually been able to find some great talent that initially maybe weren't there out of high school, but in their second or third years of part of that developmental program, they're able to move up. And for a lot of young people, that's enough. You're giving me just the opportunity to be able to play NCAA Division II level athletics. That's enough to draw them here. And then others that don't make the move, once they're here 2 or 3 years, they're like, well, I haven't been able to make the move, but I've done 2 or 3 years of college. Might as well stay here and earn and finish and get my degree.
Right.
So
Right.
really it's a model that we have seen is a win-win for the institution from a financial perspective. It's a win. Our student athletes are doing well academically. I think the op-ed points out, I think that we are third in all the private institutions, not just HBCUs, all the private institutions in our state in terms of employment outcomes for our graduates here at
Yep.
Edward Water. So again, the value proposition is very high from that perspective because a lot of these students would not have even come to college but for the attractiveness of being able to potentially become NCAA Division II student athletes. So
Yeah.
again, we've seen it to be demonstrably effective.
So, as you described it, I'm imagining 125 guys showing up for football practice. So I'm trying to think about athletic trainers. I'm trying to think about
Oh yeah,
academic advisors. I'm trying to think
that's
about
right.
the support systems that you have to put in place, mental health counseling. How have you factored all of that into what the students are needing?
That's a challenge. I'll be very honest, but you gotta at least have the baseline kinds of support that you need to support those kinds of rosters. So we do a lot in partnership, for example, with our Division of Academic Affairs. We have a university college here, and so many of and I say this all the time. Our student athletes are students first. So many of the offerings that we have here at the institution, we don't have to have institutional specific academic supports exclusively for student athletes. Well, there's a university college here that has tutoring and all the kinds of academic advisement that all students can take advantage of. So I think partnering with those kinds of departments and entities at the institution is particularly important. The athletic training, matter of fact, we just had a conversation last week with my athletic director. We just added an additional athletic trainer that we're looking for. I will tell you, it's difficult to find certified athletic trainers right
Yes,
now.
it
They're
is.
everywhere. It's
Yes, it
very
is right
difficult.
now.
But
Absolutely.
but she and I just had a call last week, because our rosters are growing. She said we got to add another athletic trainer, so we've just added another athletic trainer. But that's something that you gotta make sure that you're keeping your finger on the pulse there in terms of making sure that you do have the support that you need to support the student athletes. But I'll take another thing. It's not for everyone. It takes a special kind of coach. It takes a special kind of athletic administrative staff. If your concern is only winning, Edward Waters isn't the place for you. We believe you can win, but we're not going to win to the detriment of a program being in the hole for $500,000 because that's not sustainable, right? And so it's striking that right balance, and it's not for everyone. Our coaches are not just measured on wins and losses, but of course they're measured upon the success of the student athletes in the classroom. But then also that third piece is your program producing revenue for the institution?
Okay.
And at our level, it really is from an enrollment perspective. You
Uh-huh.
know, different from Division One. I mean, we don't have big television contracts. We don't have big major donors that are coming in and providing support at the NCAA Division Two level. So for us, the low hanging fruit or the lowest hanging fruit is often through enrollment revenue. So every single coach we're looking at the end of the day, is your program producing net revenue for the institution? If it's not, we got to have a conversation, right? Because that's it's a different model, but
Yeah.
this is sacrilege to say in higher ed. But guess what? This is a business. We have bills, we've got
Great.
salaries, we've got payroll, and so I think it's a paradigm shift from how we have ordinarily, I think, looked at athletics, particularly at the NCAA Division two level, but I think it's a conversation that's long overdue.
You bring up a really interesting point about what is the coach's focus? Because so many times I hear presidents talk about, I say, how are you going to measure the coach's success? And they say, well, they just have to win. And that's all
Right.
they really think about is winning. And you're saying, I do care about the students having a good time. I do care about you recruiting and hopefully retaining the athletes that you bring to campus because that helps all of us. Can you talk a little bit more about that mindset?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, for example, I'll use my baseball coach, for example, Reginald Johnson. He does a phenomenal, phenomenal job. So our baseball program typically cares about almost 90 student athletes. He has an amazing academic outcome of those young men. Their GPA collectively for 90 kids is about 3.3, 3.4 GPAs. Matter of fact, 2 years ago, one of his baseball players was our valedictorian in our graduating class, a
Wow.
perfect 4.0 GPA, who actually is working for the Atlanta Braves right now. And to me, he's the model for understanding, hey, we've got to be able to generate revenue as a program, but at the same time, that doesn't mean that we're sacrificing competitiveness or being able to build a winning program. So his program has won two of the last three SIAC baseball championships, including this current year, just passed in May. And we just became NCAA Division two in July of 2024.
Okay.
So just in his second year, this past year, was the first time in the 160-year history of our institution that we put a men's program, our women did the same thing in basketball this year, in the NCAA tournament, right? So to have a coach that understands and is able to navigate, hey, we've got to have this net tuition revenue, but at the same time, it doesn't mean that we can't be competitive, and not just be competitive, that we can't win championships and hang banners, right? But it takes the right kind of coach. A lot of coaches,
Yeah.
hey, I just want to focus on winning and
Right.
coaching. And I say, hey, I get it, but Edward Waters is not going to be the place for you because
Yeah.
we are a small private that is dependent upon tuition and revenue to survive. Now, the trade-off that we have is I say, hey, if you get me this number of students, I'm going to reinvest in the program. And I think presidents and administrators have to be open and honest and transparent about sharing that wealth. You can't take all the profit revenue and then say to the coach, all right, well, just keep doing what you're doing with what you have. We're not going to ever reinvest in the program. So, for example, and if he was here, he would tell you when we first started this, he's added additional coaches. He's got to have additional coaches if he's carrying
Yeah,
a roster
for
almost
sure.
90, right? He's got 4 or 5 different Nike uniforms. He's got all, the kinds of accoutrement that he needs to retain and attract his student athletes. There's got to be a modicum of the net tuition revenue and the profit that we make on those programs that we reinvest in those programs.
Okay.
We've been able to increase his salary and others because now Division I institutions, that's another thing we can talk about, are coming in and picking off my talent. So you talk about retention, that's a real challenge for us right now.
Imagine.
Yeah, but not in the way that you typically would think of it. Our retention challenge now is Division I institutions that dangle all that NIL and come and take our talent,
Yeah.
right? I mean,
Right.
it's almost like, we're penalized even though our model, when it works, is proof of concept. So, for example, my women's basketball program that equally this past year had the best record in the conference, advanced to the NCAA tournament for the first time in our institution's history. He had to rebuild his whole roster. He only had 3 young ladies that are returning,
Yeah.
in large part because, we got national recognition, we were nationally ranked. And so now the Division Ones come in like vultures, right? And
Absolutely.
they're like picking off your talent. And so, that's a challenge from a retention perspective that, I would say for academic administrators and presidents that might deploy this model, they have to be conversant in being able to explicate, not make excuse, but explicate to folks that may come and look at your retention rate and say, oh gosh, your retention rate is so poor, but you got to be able to put that in context,
Yeah.
right? The fact that, the retention in the women's basketball program is 10% is actually proof of concept that what we're doing is working because we're
Okay.
bringing in student athletes, we're developing them, right? Such that now Division I institutions are coming and taking them. So even though it hurts us from a retention perspective,
Right. Right.
it's proved to that young man or that young lady or that parent to say, hey, if you come to us for 2 years, 3 years, and your goal is to get to Division I level, Edward Waters is a place that you can do that, right?
Yeah. We say the same thing at Penn. I've heard coaches publicly say, "Look, come and get your degree here, and then go play your 5th year somewhere else."
That's right. That's right.
There's value in doing those kinds of things. The last question I want to ask you, because I get a lot of leadership teams who listen to this podcast, particularly from the students in my classes. So if you were to advise them today to understand the process that you're navigating in college athletics, what skill sets do those leaders on your leadership team need to have to understand all of this?
Well, I think particularly if your students have an interest in serving at small private institutions to understand, you've got to understand higher ed finance. You have got to understand tuition discounting. You have to understand how you're building a scholarship, right? You've got to understand at the end of the day, if it doesn't make dollars, it doesn't make sense. And I know that that's, again, it's almost sacrilege to say in the higher ed space, but within the sector today as a small private, you have to constantly keep your eyes on the financial bottom line because the road is history will tell us there are a number of phenomenal institutions that took their eye off that ball that unfortunately are no longer with us, and so that's a skill set that you have to have. You've got to be able to also really articulate the value proposition to all of the different stakeholders and constituencies,
Mm.
right? You've got to connect for that faculty member. Say to me now, why should we go and build this stadium when I need X, Y, and Z? Talk to me about, how this is going to impact what I do on a day-to-day basis in a positive way. And so being able to connect those dots
Okay.
and to be able to articulate how there's an inextricable link between everything that we're doing here at the institution, how athletics can benefit our faculty, how staff can benefit, how, again, so for, I'll give you this quick example. So now that we moved to NCAA Division II, we now are members of the SISC conference. They have a partnership with ESPN Plus. So this
Okay.
past year, we had 5 games that were nationally televised on ESPN, right? And so how do I translate that to a faculty member? Well, this year we had over 12,000 applications. We've seen our applications jump immeasurably because now Edward Waters is in the homes of people all across the country. When,
Right.
as an NAIA institution, we were never on television.
Yeah.
And so our brand wasn't getting out. So how does that translate? More applications means more students. More students mean more revenue. More revenue helps us to provide dollars for research, provide dollars for faculty stipends, salary increases, all the kinds of things that faculty want to hear in terms of us being able to add degree programs. We've doubled the number of academic degree programs that we had here at the university since we've arrived. So the last 9 years, we only had 8 degree programs when we arrived. We have 16 now, including 4 graduate degree programs. We're getting ready to add our first doctorate degree program in the next 18 months or so. And a lot of this has been the result of investments from athletics, right? And the return on that investment in terms of that net tuition revenue, profit revenue that we've been able to experience. So being able to translate and understand the nuances of higher ed finance, I think will be critical for your students as they're looking at, higher ed administration opportunities.
Zachary, I can't thank you enough. Your energy, enthusiasm, and clarity of purpose is so meaningful. So I really appreciate you sharing this, not only with me, but with the folks who listen to this podcast. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so very much for having me. And Dr. Weaver, thank you for what you do, the work that you do in highlighting athletics within the higher education space is just absolutely, absolutely indispensable.